every day that goes by, the manga industry gets more and more brutal. There are hundreds of new series dropping all the time, and creators get one chance to make a first impression. And that first impression is chapter 1. Within those few pages, the author has already told you everything you need to know about the manga, and they've even decided if the series was going to be legendary or complete trash. But what's the difference between the first chapter that gets this reaction and a first chapter that gets this reaction? Let's start with one of the most famous opening chapters of all time. Before Naruto became this legendary manga that everyone knows, it was just some small series from a pretty unknown author trying to make it big. What you need to know is that at the time, Naruto was going to come out on the weekly Shonen Jump, a manga magazine with series like Dragon Ball, One Piece, and dozens of other series fighting for readers' attention. The first chapter starts with Naruto, and he's kind of a little piece of garbage. He's pulling pranks, failing at ninja school, and desperately trying to get attention in pretty much all the freaking wrong ways. He fails his graduation exam because he can't even do the simple clone technique, which is kind of like this really basic ability that everyone can do. But it quickly gets worse. Naruto gets tricked into stealing this forbidden scroll by his teacher called Mizuki. But his other teacher, Iruka, tracks him down and realizes what's going on. And that's when we learn the truth. Naruto acts like a goofball because nobody in the village likes him. The reason for that is that a long time ago, a demon fox destroyed their entire village and slayed a bunch of people, including Iruka's parents. And that fox was sealed inside of Naruto when he was just a baby. As Mizuki is about to give the finishing blow to Iruka, Naruto gets absolutely mad and uses the shadow clone technique he learned from the scroll. The same technique that made him fail the exam earlier in the chapter. He saves Iruka, and in the final moments of the chapter is finally given a ninja headband. Iruka is proud of him, lets him pass the exam, and officially acknowledges him as a ninja. The reaction was awesome. People immediately connected with Naruto and felt like Masashi Kishimoto had balanced that emotional core with genuine humor and pretty great action. But what really hooked people was the ending that just hit very hard. But here's what made this opening chapter even better. It worked as a complete story, almost like a one-shot. And at the same time, it set up the rest of the story. The first chapter became the foundation for the next 700 chapters. The pattern of Naruto proving himself and earning respect became the secret sauce of the series. The demon inside of Naruto, the village's complicated history, his relationship with Iruka, his dream of becoming Hokage. All of that is right here in chapter 1. But here's the thing. Even though people absolutely loved Naruto's first chapter, it was a very different story for Naruto's sequel, Boruto. Okay, so at this point, Naruto had just ended after 700 chapters. It was a huge series, and fans were very, very, very emotionally attached to these characters and that whole story. I mean, people like me even grew up with it. So when Masashi Kishimoto announced a sequel about Naruto's son, the expectations were kind of insane. And from the very first page, you could tell that this was going to be completely different. Instead of starting at the beginning, they showed you this epic battle between two characters where we had absolutely no idea what was going on. Then we cut to the present. Boruto is living in this peaceful, technologically advanced village with video games, computers, and scientific ninja tools. Basically, it's like a completely different world. But here's the biggest difference. Boruto's goal wasn't to prove to everyone he could become strong. This kid was already super talented. Instead, he was trying to get noticed by his dad. These two just didn't understand each other at all because they lived in completely different generations. One grew up in a world full of war, the other grew up in a world in peace. The chapter ends when Naruto's rival Sasuke returns to the village and Boruto asks him to be his teacher. And people felt kind of weird about this, for a few reasons. First of all, Kishimoto stepped back from drawing. He was going to supervise the whole thing while his assistant handled the art and someone else wrote the story. So right from the start, fans had no idea if this team could capture what made Naruto special in the first place. On one hand, that flash forward was kind of awesome. It immediately felt like something big was going to happen if you just kept reading. But at the same time, the art style looked very different from Kishimoto's original work. And not different in a, it looks good way. It was more different in a, oh, that's different kind of way. And some fans even thought that Boruto was very annoying compared to Naruto. Honestly, I know the series was always going to be compared to Naruto. That was kind of unavoidable. But to be honest, I was really surprised at just how much people don't like it. I only recently read Boruto, and in my opinion, all the things that people complained about in this first chapter were actually its strengths. The genius of Boruto's opening is that it shows you that this isn't Naruto number 2. It's supposed to be something completely different. That's like the central conflict of the entire thing. Boruto isn't trying to gain recognition like his father did. He's trying to escape the recognition that comes with being Naruto's son. It's a completely different emotional journey, and chapter 1 establishes that difference pretty much immediately. The opening was there to show you that this story was going to be different, and it did it in a way that was clear and satisfying, which is really difficult. It somehow found a way to make this world feel both familiar and new. But whether Boruto lived up to that first chapter and continued being good, that's a very different conversation. But what happens when people actually love a sequel's first chapter? Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo dropped in 2025, approximately a year after the original Jujutsu Kaisen ended. So yeah, pretty recently. And this is what you have to understand. JJK was one of the most popular manga of the entire decade, maybe the most popular. But the ending was extremely controversial. And by that, I mean that a lot of people hated it. So when the author, Gege Akutami, announced a sequel, the pressure was insane. This time he was going to write it while someone else handled the art, just kind of like Boruto. And he immediately made a very risky choice. He didn't just pick up the story where it left off. He jumped 68 years into the future. The two main characters are grandchildren of fan-favorite characters from the original JJK, and the Earth is now dealing with aliens, and the third main character is one of these aliens. Yeah, the group has to go on an investigation because they discovered that there were citizens disappearing left and right, probably getting stolen to harvest their energy, or something like that. They think it might be a curse user, which is basically a magic warrior, so our trio goes on a mission. They do their detective work, find the villain, and fight him with techniques that'll make any JJK fan go, I know that move! I know that move! They beat their final villain, and this dude explains that there's probably going to be a massive war, but this time sorcerers are way weaker than the legends from 68 years ago. In the beginning, the fan reaction was good, but they were still kind of worried. People were happy that the first chapter was decent, but on the other hand, no one was really sure if it was going to continue going in the right direction. Unlike Boruto, fans were happy that the art style was still pretty similar to the original series. If you were a JJK reader, this chapter was packed with references from the original series. It kind of felt like a love letter to JJK fans. And if you were new to the series, it worked as a standalone story. It wasn't just more of the same. It was asking what happens when the same world faces completely new challenges. And yeah, it's still early days, but people seem to be generally kind of happy with where the story is going. So we'll have to see what happens. Sometimes the first chapter is so absolutely unhinged that people literally have no clue what the heck is going to happen after. Tatsuki Fujimoto had already shown everyone he could create some wild stuff with Fire Punch, but that series was just a bit too weird for mainstream success. So when he got the chance to create Chainsaw Man for Weekly Shonen Jump, the biggest manga magazine ever, no one knew what the heck was going to happen. First, we meet Denji, a kid living in absolute poverty. He's got one piece of bread for dinner, and he's missing an eye and a kidney that he sold. So as you can see, this dude is not really like your regular main character, and his only friend, this chainsaw devil dog thing. Because in this world, people live with devils that are born from people's fears. So, for example, Denji fights the tomato devil at some point, which isn't very strong because, why would anyone be scared of a tomato? Oh, and also Denji works for the Yakuza. But the Yakuza boss leads Denji into a trap in some abandoned warehouse to, offer him a job. Here's the thing. We discover that he made a contract with the zombie devil, which turns him into a zombie. He attacks Denji and straight up destroys him. But the small chainsaw devil dog revives this man by fusing their bodies. Denji pulls a cord that's sticking out of his chest and turns into the chainsaw devil, aka Chainsaw Man. He annihilates the entire horde of zombies in this brutal scene. We get panel after panel of some of the coolest looking action. A little later, this girl called Makima shows up and finds Denji. She approaches him and says that he has two choices: work for her or get slain because he's a devil. Denji accepts and becomes a devil hunter. When the chapter came out, the manga community honestly lost its mind. People immediately realized that Fujimoto was doing something completely different. But more than that, it perfectly set up this unique tone where the most ridiculous moments could coexist with genuine emotional scenes. This was a series that could shift from comedy to horror to emotional within just a few pages. The first chapter made it feel very different from anything out there, and the manga still manages to carry this feeling to this day. But what about when Fujimoto's assistant decided they were going to write a first chapter? The author of Dandadan, Yukinobu Tatsu, had been grinding as an assistant for Tatsuki Fujimoto, who is one of the greatest authors of all time. So when this man started his own series, people had no idea if it was going to be unhinged or if it might be something more normal. And listen, I'm going to try to explain this first chapter as clearly as I can, but I really need you to focus, okay? Basically, we get two high school students. They start arguing about supernatural stuff. This girl called Momo believes in ghosts but thinks aliens are stupid, while this guy called Okarun is obsessed with aliens but thinks ghost stories are stupid. So these two make a bet. Okarun's gonna go to some haunted tunnel while Momo visits a place where there might be aliens. Whoever's thing turns out to be real wins the argument, I think. And of course, they're both right in the worst possible way. Okarun meets Turbo Granny, this absolute wild ghost lady who moves at a crazy speed and takes control of his body. Meanwhile, Momo gets abducted by these weird aliens who want to experiment on her. But then Okarun, who is now possessed by Turbo Granny, smashes through the alien spaceship and attacks the aliens. Then Momo suddenly unlocks her hidden psychic powers and they manage to escape. But here's the thing. They can't just go back to their normal lives because the only way to stop Okarun from turning back into this monster is if Momo helps him out with her powers. So now their objective is to go back to that tunnel and find a solution. Whew. Okay, within months, Dandadan had millions of readers. People praised how the first chapter balanced horror with comedy and action, and the art was just gorgeous. The first chapter established Dandadan as the manga that just cannot be predicted. Readers learned real quick to expect the unexpected, and somehow Tatsu kept delivering on that impossible promise throughout the entire series. I have absolutely no idea how he did it, but he did it. It was a fantastic first chapter because it managed to capture every single thing that would make Dandadan the very special piece of fiction it is today. Unfortunately, sometimes the first chapter immediately ruins the entire series. Astro Royale was Ken Wakui's new manga. For those of you who don't know, this man had just finished Tokyo Revengers, which had been a massive success. Except for the ending, which a lot of people thought was, garbage. So when this man announced he was starting a new series, it was kind of a problem because all of the negative feelings that were still there. We start with the funeral of this very powerful Yakuza boss. His son Hibaru is supposed to take over, but he refuses because he believes that his brother should be the new boss. But then, out of literally nowhere, a meteor shower hits Earth. And suddenly, random people across Tokyo start getting these astro powers, which are just basic abilities like punching really hard. The problem is that Hibaru also has a bunch of other brothers who want to become the big boss of the Yakuza. And now that they have powers, they're going to use that as an opportunity to seize control. After this first chapter came out, everything went wrong. The reception was okay at best. Personally, I felt like it was decent, and I still think that. But looking back, I honestly understand why people felt the way they did. The problem with the first chapter wasn't that it was bad. It's that it was very boring. Many readers felt like they'd seen this story before and that it was generic as heck. The meteor shower granting powers was kinda random. The battle royale setup was pretty basic. The Yakuza setting was something he had already done. The main character came across as too perfect, and it didn't really bring anything fresh to the table. And unfortunately, things didn't really change. The series went on for several months before getting canceled. I haven't personally read Tokyo Revengers, but people also said that Astro Royale never managed to recapture that special something that made Wakui's previous work so awesome. But what happens when a legendary author comes back and actually nails his first chapter? Nihei Tsutomu had spent years creating these absolutely mind-bending sci-fi epics. He's mostly known for Blame, Blom, I don't know. And this man is a straight up master at drawing beautiful environments that completely immerse you. And he's always had this really interesting storytelling style where characters barely even time. So when he announced he was going to do a fantasy manga, fans had one question. How? The first chapter of Tower Dungeon throws you into this medieval kingdom that's in a very big crisis. The king's been slain, the princess got stolen by this thing, and there's a massive tower that apparently just fell from the sky one day. So they're trying to recruit pretty much anyone available to help, and that's when we meet Yuva. He starts packing his things, including the lid of a cooking pot, which he straps on as a shield. He's now part of a team that has to rescue the princess. They enter the tower and defeat every creature in their path until they encounter this absolutely disgusting floating thing that's basically their first boss fight. The battle is difficult, and it looks like they might lose until Yuva decides to climb on a pillar and literally crash into the creature. And now, they return to their base knowing they'll have to get to the highest floor of the tower to save the princess. People were immediately hooked, and honestly, I get it. The author was applying his signature style to a completely different genre, and somehow it worked. The tower felt genuinely terrifying, and the creatures looked like they were taken straight from a freaking Dark Souls game. What makes Tower Dungeon's first chapter so effective is just how unusual it is. There was still that iconic architecture Tsutomu was known for, but there was also much more storytelling and character development that we hadn't seen in his previous series. It perfectly sets this bizarre tone that you can find throughout the entire thing. This first chapter gave a lot of deserved hype to a series that is still fantastic to this day. There are other times where manga authors drop some of the darkest opening chapters in manga history. Kentaro Miura was just a young dude back in 1989, right? But this man really looked at the manga industry and decided his debut was going to be the most insane fantasy manga anyone had ever seen. In the very first page of Berserk, the main character Guts is clapping the cheeks of a literal demon. Then he pulls out a cannon from his fake arm and just obliterates it. Yes, this is literally the first page of the entire manga. He then casually walks into this town and starts bodying people left and right. Bandits, warriors, thieves, that kind of stuff. We meet a little fairy called Puck that Guts accidentally saves when going on a rampage. So Puck tries to thank him, right? But Guts, being this cold-hearted warrior, tells him to leave him alone. Puck feels like something is seriously wrong with this guy, which is very understandable, and decides to follow him. Unfortunately, Guts gets captured by soldiers who work for this Baron guy. He manages to escape, fights a bunch of soldiers, and absolutely annihilates every single one of them. But then, he confronts the Baron, who is actually a giant snake-headed demon. But once again, Guts pulls out that arm cannon and just deletes him. Then, follows up with his Dragon Slayer sword and slices the Baron for good. Until finally, he proceeds to walk away like nothing ever happened. Now, here's the thing. When this chapter dropped, people thought it was cool, but also a little bit disturbing. Some thought it was too brutal. Others that it was too dark. And that makes sense. The first chapter basically said, this isn't your typical fantasy manga, this is a world where evil wins most of the time. Miura made the first pages and the entire first chapter shocking just so that you knew exactly what you were getting into. And on top of that, he started the entire story by basically giving you no information and throwing you into this insane situation. The first chapter was a perfect foundation in the sense that it set the tone of the entire series pretty much immediately. A small group of people realized that Berserk was something very special and continued reading, until eventually this series blew up to the point that it's now widely considered as the best manga of all time. Sure, Miura managed to create something incredible, but I think that people often underestimate how much the first chapter contributed to that. Unfortunately, sometimes even legendary authors don't have a very good start. When I say JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, most people probably think of the beautiful art, insane fashion, the JoJo pose, baby. But when Hirohiko Araki started the series, things were very, very different. The first chapter opens up with some ancient ceremony. We get this guy putting on this stone mask during some ritual. Spike starts shooting out of it, turning him into some supernatural warrior. But then, out of nowhere, the whole thing just cuts to 1800s England. We get George Joestar, his wife, and baby Jonathan riding in a carriage during a storm when suddenly they fall off a cliff. George and Jonathan survive and are found by Dario Brando. And what does this guy do when he finds them? Well, obviously, he helps. No, I'm kidding. He tries to rob them, but then George wakes up and he's like, "Oh my God, thank you for saving my life." My guy, this man was about to leave you right there. Years later, Dario remembers this favor and asks George if he could take care of his only son called Dio. And trust me, this boy is the most diabolical little piece of garbage you have ever seen in your life. Like, I'm not exaggerating. The first thing he does is show up to the Joestar mansion where he's gonna live. Their dog runs up really happy like, "Oh my God, we got a visitor." And what does Dio do? This psycho high kicks him in the jaw. And that's basically how they end the first chapter. Now, when this happened, people did not enjoy it. There were a lot of things happening, but at the same time, it was not that interesting. Readers thought that this first chapter was so mediocre that the series almost got canceled after a while. But the truth is, this chapter was absolutely necessary to build the foundation for all the absolute insanity that was about to come. The thing about Araki is that he wasn't just setting up some basic rivalry. This genius was laying the foundation for a series that was literally going to take place over generations. JoJo's has several parts with several Joestar members, and Dio remains the villain for a few of those. Looking back now, you can see how chapter 1 had all the DNA for everything that made JoJo absolutely awesome. The over-the-top drama, the clear good versus evil, mixing historical settings with supernatural crazy stuff, and most importantly, that central theme of everything being freaking bizarre. It's the perfect example of how a first chapter could have completely ruined a series, but ended up becoming pretty legendary decades later. Usually, when you read a first chapter, you get a pretty good idea of what you signed up for, right? But what happens when that first chapter gives you one of the most intense plot twists? The Promised Neverland opens up and we immediately see the Gracefield orphanage. We get happy kids running around in a field, a loving mother figure taking care of everybody, just, very wholesome stuff. We meet Emma, Norman, and Ray. These three kids who are clearly the smartest children here. Now, there are some weird little details that don't quite make sense. Everybody has these number tattoos on their necks. They're doing these daily tests that seem way too intense for kids. And there's this rule about never going near to the gate. But every place has rules, right? So we're good. One day, a little girl called Connie gets adopted. Everyone is celebrating because she's getting a family. The kids are happy. Mama Isabella is smiling and she leaves to go meet her new parents. But there's a problem. Before she left, Connie forgot her little toy rabbit. So Emma and Norman decide to run and get it to her before she's gone forever. They get to the entrance, and what they discover is insane. Connie isn't going to a loving family. This little girl is about to get shipped off as food. That's when we find out that the orphanage is actually a human farm for man-eating demons, and that Mama Isabella is straight up a human farmer. Readers felt like they were about to get some cute slice-of-life story. But instead, they got hit with a horror thriller, which felt like such an awesome twist. The concept felt fresh and super fun, and that first chapter immediately set the tone for the entire series. It established the story as one that would never let readers get comfortable. Any moment of happiness could be hiding some absolutely wild stuff underneath. But most importantly, it set up the central tension that would drive everything. These kids had to escape, and they had to do it without getting caught. The genius of this opening is how it makes you go back and rethink everything. Those daily tests, the loving care, that's just farming. But it also leaves you with a million questions that you absolutely need to answer. To this day, Chapter 1 of The Promised Neverland is considered one of the most exceptional first chapters ever written, and a perfect introduction to what was gonna become an absolutely amazing manga. For the first part, okay? And sometimes a rookie author somehow manages to create a very special first chapter for their first manga forever. Kei Urana had been grinding for years under Atsushi Okubo, learning how to create manga from the dude who made Fire Force and Soul Eater. So when they announced they were going to drop their own manga called Gachiakuta, people didn't really know what the heck to expect. The series opens up with Rudo, this little dude living in the slums right next to this gorgeous city. But here's the thing. While everybody else is minding their business, this kid is out here in the middle of the night trying to collect trash and fix it. As in, he saves that stuff and repairs it. Rudo lives with Recto, this really cool dude who's basically his adoptive father. Later on, Rudo decides to give a girl he likes a toy he repaired especially for her. Everyone's happy, Rudo comes back home, and boom! Recto is on the floor with a whole freaking sword through his body. He's still barely alive, and his last words are telling Rudo to change this world. But it gets worse. The city police storm in and see Rudo covered in blood over Recto's body. So they immediately think he's the one who did it. They accuse him, drag him away, and throw him off a freaking cliff. No questions asked. And as he's falling, Rudo screams with pure rage that he's gonna come back and get his revenge. He then falls into the abyss, a trash desert way below the city inhabited by gigantic garbage monsters. When this first chapter dropped, the response was really good. Readers were kind of blown away by Gachiakuta's art style. This didn't feel like some rookie trying to figure it out. This felt like someone who was already at the top of their game. The art was beautiful. The storytelling was pretty awesome. The world building was absolutely insane. I mean, what else could you ask for? The genius of this first chapter is that it gave you everything you needed. You got a clear direction with Rudo's revenge arc. You got mysteries that made you need to know more, like who the heck slayed Recto? And it perfectly captured what this series was about. It set the story up in a way that Urana managed to carry for over 100 chapters, even turning it into a fantastic anime.